Hey folks, Segasonicfan here, and I've been knee-deep in the Accucel 6. I was making a video previously about why I thought these were really good and had only some minor engineering flaws, and boy am I going to backtrack on that. After digging around this thing more, I realized it has major engineering flaws, and while the code is it's still got a really nice firmware, the hardware stuff leaves some things to be desired. First and foremost, upon closer inspection, I realized both the input and the output have no fuse. I mean, wow. Why would you make a battery charger for a bunch of different chemistries that's likely to catch fire and not even include a fuse? That's insane and inexcusable, but that's what they did. So what does it have? Well, if we zoom in closer here, and you'll see I replaced the buttons on mine with the newer model buttons, button style. There is an N-channel FET here, and this is the gate here that's controlled by the microcontroller, and that's it. All of these holes, these vias here from the positive rail, go straight across the board and to your capacitor and everything else that can explode. So there's literally no fusing at all on the output here. And on the input, you'll see here, this is just bridged now because that was an N-channel FET. And the thing is, when N-channel FETs break, they often will just short, which was the case in this one. It just created a direct short inside the chip. So I could just leave that there and it would accomplish the same thing. But since I know this chip is bad and I don't want to be fooled later when I open this up, I'm going to make sure that it's out of there. Moreover, there's no fusing for the input at all. So I went ahead and while it doesn't look pretty, it will be functional. I cut the large trace here from the positive to the positive end of the capacitor, the large bulk capacitor, and wired it up to an automotive 5 amp fuse. 5 amps should be enough. If it's on a 12 volt supply, that'll mean 60 watts. This thing is supposed to be max at 50. If the fuse blows, I'll put in a larger one. Not a big deal. One thing I had to do though was sand down the sides of the fuse, the plastic housing, which is meant for just pulling it. It's not like a dangerous thing because this has to be lower than the TO220 package, which is supposed to rest against the aluminum case for, you guessed it, heat sinking purposes. So that's important. And what else can I say? And then the reason I started investigating all of this is because it has those crazy, it will spark on the plug when you plug it in, a sign of bad engineering. And why it does that is because I think what's happening is there's a 4K7 resistor here, and then there's a 22K resistor and a capacitor up here. Well, these two parts go to a node, which is presumably connected to the microcontroller. But the 4K7, which is the lower resistance, is actually tied to the positive rail. And so these two nodes here go to the gate, this last pin on the right of your N-channel FET. Since this is the lowest resistance, I can't believe they did this. It essentially has a pull-up resistor. That's the lowest resistance, which means that this defaults to being on. You should never do that, folks. FETs are also always supposed to default to the off stage, and then the microcontroller is supposed to turn it on, or at the very least, you're supposed to have an RC circuit to let it ramp up. Now you probably can't have it default to off all the time because you need to supply power to the microcontroller through this NFET. But at the very least, there should be an RC circuit. And then if you want to create a voltage divider with like some sort of, I'm not even sure what this is, what the FET control is for. Honestly, I think it's for under voltage protection. But in any case, it needs at least an RC circuit. And so what I originally was doing was just you can add a capacitor from this negative rail here to the gate, and that should slow down the rise time, so you won't get a huge surge on the plug the inrush current when you plug it in. That's my theory, but I can't test it because the darn NFET was blown because there's no fuse. Crazy, folks. So Yeah, definitely disappointed by that. Someone posted on, I think it's the SparkFun page for these, the obsolete SparkFun page, that there's an Atmega controller underneath this display, and there's a bunch of clones of these out there. Also worth noting that this is sometimes advertised as an 80-watt charger at 10 amps, but if you check the spec sheet, it's not. It's 50-watt. Always a 50-watt charger. I was really surprised to see that because I was like, how do they double the output of this thing in the same form factor? Why would they do that? Why would they do that, not just engineer a whole new one? It's because they didn't. It's just false advertising, and that's that. Lastly, there was one little small trace under here I had to patch. Keep an eye out for that if you come across that. And then I have to put some thermal paste on these guys and reapply these pads and then put it back in a case. Eventually, I do want to fix the noisy fan by adding a thermal sensor to turn that on only when it's necessary. I did rip out the buzzer because it's annoying, and that was before I found out the firmware. You can actually turn it off in the firmware, so maybe I'll put the buzzer back later if I can find it. And I do really want to make and document better the temperature probe because that's going to be important for these and for safety and stuff. And then there's a fuse on the balancing circuit on the newer version, and so that I'm going to add. It's a resettable fuse. Show you really quick what that looks like. That guy right there. Believe that's going to be for the balancing circuit. What else can I say? I'll post back with more later, but yeah, the firmware is great, but man, not having fuses, that's crazy. Oh, I'm going to add an inline fuse to this banana plug cable. Absolutely have to do that. I'm hoping that the firmware will take into account the on resistance of a fuse on resistance. If it's not resettable, it's really, really low. So I think that's going to be okay. But I'm curious once I replace that FET if the MCU, I guess it doesn't matter too much if it's the input FET, but if the MCU is going to accommodate for the RDS on of different NFETs, or if it's programmed even with that much precision. Anyway, more to come. And yeah, this is Segasonicfan signing out.